Welcome to My Fitness Fight, the channel where I talk about all things martial arts, combat sports, self-defense, and even fitness and personal development. And if you're currently on a fitness journey like I am, I hope that we can offer each other a little bit of inspiration and encouragement along the way. As you may have already noticed, this is a small, new channel, which is mostly a passion project for me, and I'm experimenting with different types of content. And recently, one of the biggest news stories in the MMA space that has been tugging at my heartstrings is about Ben Askren, who recently survived a double lung transplant after suffering severe pneumonia. And Ben is an absolute legend of mixed martial arts. I know he gets memed on a lot because of the really fast knockout loss to Jorge Masvidal, and of course the fight with whichever of the Paul brothers it was, which he obviously just did for the money because he was already retired as a professional fighter at that point. But if you're not familiar with Ben Askren before he came to the UFC, then you are not really familiar with Ben Askren, because Ben was already 34 years old and had been a professional MMA fighter and champion for a decade already at that point. He also fought his entire career at lightweight, which is 155 pounds, and then moved up to welterweight at 170 when he joined the UFC after having been inactive as a fighter for over a year. So after being one of the best college wrestlers in the country for however many, probably 4 years, and then being a professional mixed martial artist for 10 years, and being in his mid-30s, he opted to wade into the Shark Tank of the UFC against guys who are not just at a higher caliber of talent than what he was used to facing, but who are also 15, 20, maybe even 30 pounds heavier, therefore much bigger and stronger than most of the guys that he had previously fought. So to say that Ben Askren isn't an absolute warrior is to say that you haven't really seen him fight. And if you watch enough of his fights, you'll come to understand why his nickname is Funky, and it's not his hair. He has a very unique style as a freestyle wrestler, where he was often willing to sacrifice position and go for what would typically be considered low percentage attacks or sweeps, and he just always seemed to come out on top. And the style looked bizarre and funky, but it was actually grounded in both a high level of skill and creativity on the mat, as well as phenomenal grip strength. And in the UFC, he beat Robbie Lawler in round 1 of his first fight via Bulldog choke, which is not an easy submission to pull off. And then he lost to Jorge Masvidal with the infamous 5-second flying knee KO, and he lost to Damian Maia via submission, but that's not really discrediting because Maia is a significantly larger athlete. He's also one of the best MMA black belts of all time, and if I'm remembering the fight correctly, the reason that Ben got submitted is because he tried to go for something funky. Even though it was in the 3rd round of a fight that he might have been able to win on points, instead of thinking about defense and staying safe, he saw something and he went for it, and he ended up getting choked out. But that is just one of the things that made him funky, and one of the things that, for me, made him a very entertaining fighter. And I know that a lot of people don't consider him an entertaining fighter. A lot of people call him a boring fighter. But I think the only way you can really have that opinion is if you just don't appreciate wrestling in MMA. That doesn't necessarily mean that you don't understand wrestling. It could just be that you prefer striking. But if you find high caliber wrestling to be entertaining or educational on its own merit, then watching him maul guys in MMA fights is both entertaining and educational. And there were some really nice sentiments shared by people who have been associated with him, including negative relationships in the past. This via Mostly MMA on Facebook. Jorge Masvidal sends support. I know we were rivals in the ring. I just want to say God bless you. And when I get back in America, if I can shake your hand, brother, and say a prayer with you, it'll be amazing. I know you are going to pull through this. That's Jorge Masvidal talking to Ben Askren. And they, of course, had a rivalry surrounding their fight. I believe they've also gone back and forth and had a rivalry on social media before. But I think this is a great example of sportsmanship within MMA. And I think both of them were probably aware when they were tilting at each other online that it was largely part of the job, largely to generate interest and keep everyone entertained. And that doesn't mean that there wasn't some truth to it, but at the end of the day, it's not hatred or a legitimate wish of ill upon the other because these two men respect each other. And Dana White is another very public figure who has been associated with Askren in a negative way. I think Dana was often blamed for the fact that Askren didn't come to the UFC earlier because he was the king of the Bellator lightweight division for a long time. And so people who were really active MMA fans at the time, like myself, wanted to see him come to the UFC and compete against the other best guys in the world. And I don't know exactly what the issue actually was, but I do know that a lot of people blamed Dana White for it. So it's really nice to hear this from Dana White, also via Mostly MMA on Facebook. Dana was quoted as saying, "I usually don't talk about that stuff, but yes, I did. We reached out to his wife as soon as we heard and told her if there's anything you need, and yes, I did. I just don't like talking about that. That's between us." And I believe the question that he's answering must have been something like, did you donate to Ben Askren's medical fund? And so Dana's saying, yes, he did donate, and they also reached out to his family to make sure that they were all right. So I've always been a big fan of Ben Askren for his fighting style. I don't really know much about him as a person, but it seems like he's a family man. It seems like he's a pretty good guy that people seem to like, and he is an absolute legend of the sport. So I'm really glad to hear that he was able to get the care he needed and that he's now in recovery. And now we'll move on to the martial arts question and answer phase of this video. I mentioned earlier that Ben Askren defeated Robbie Lawler via Bulldog choke, and a while back someone on Reddit asked what this technique is called. That is a large bull attacking a man, and he grabbed its neck and basically hit it with a guillotine sacrifice throw, and now he's holding it down by the neck and antlers. And this is indeed where the Bulldog choke got its name. Now in this video, this guy actually does more like a guillotine style choke, but a typical Bulldog choke would be where you're facing in the same direction as the person, or in this case, the bull, and you attack their neck with a headlock or a rear naked choke like grip. And it can be a very effective choke or crank if it goes on fast enough. The reason that you don't see it used that often in MMA is because if you don't get their neck perfectly, they can take your back and use a superior position to nullify the submission, and then usually they'll end up in a dominant position. So that's the reason that you don't really see people use that technique very often, but it has worked. Carlos Newton submitted Pat Militic with a Bulldog choke, and I have seen it happen a few other times. I think I've seen it happen in women's MMA more often than men's MMA because women tend to have less neck muscles, so they're a little bit more vulnerable to a fast choke like that. But yeah, that is where the name comes from. It comes from what cowboys call bulldogging a bull, which is basically just grabbing its neck and using that to try and stop it from hurting anyone. Kind of like the way that a bulldog would grab onto a bull's neck with its jaws in order to defeat it. Someone asked, does the average person care if someone practices martial arts? Like, does it impress them, or do they get a different view of you? My answer: in my experience, most people who don't train have a stereotypical view of martial arts. The three main stereotypes I hear are that if you practice martial arts, you're 1, crazy and violent, mostly linked to combat sports like boxing; 2, a wimp who pays for fake fighting lessons, mostly linked to traditional martial arts like karate and kung fu; or 3, gay, mostly linked to grappling arts like wrestling and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Very few people who haven't trained are aware of the value of martial arts, and their ego will usually prevent them from acknowledging it unless they get their ass kicked by someone who does train. And we had some good replies. Someone said, as a psychotic gay wimp, I feel seen. Someone else said, this is so accurate. And someone else here said, I died at number 3, and then has a personal story about how a friend didn't understand the context of what was going on in a Brazilian jiu-jitsu studio. So if you've ever practiced martial arts extensively enough that your friends become aware of it, you might be familiar with some of these stereotypes as well. And we've got time for one more question. Someone asked, are high kicks in self-defense always bad? My answer: I would say high kicks are rarely the best option in self-defense, but I wouldn't go so far as always bad unless you don't know how to kick, in which case they are always bad. And in relation to that, I've actually seen at least 3 or 4 different street fighting and street self-defense videos in which someone who clearly had a high level of kicking training used kicks, including leg kicks, body kicks, head kicks, even spinning kicks effectively in street situations. I certainly wouldn't recommend it for most people. However, if you have the skill and you have the space and the right footwear and you judge that you're going to be able to stay on balance and execute it in the right timing, then who am I to tell you not to? Because again, I have seen videos of people doing it successfully. All right, that'll do it for this video. If you're a fan of Ben Askren and you didn't hear about this, I encourage you to give him some love on social media. Also, thanks to Mostly MMA, it's a great Facebook page and Facebook group. They're probably also on other social media platforms. So if you're looking for a good online MMA community, I recommend that. Like, subscribe, and share if you want to see more content from me, and feel free to leave a comment if there's anything that you found particularly entertaining that you definitely want to see more of.